you so much. That is a tough act to follow. There's no way. I didn't bring boots or anything that I should have brought with me. Thank you to the Foundation for inviting me here. And wow, I-40 was interesting tonight. But it is such a treat to be here. So I need to get a sense of who all of you are. How many of you listen to country music fairly regularly? How many of you have been to Merle Fest? Are any of you full-time students here at Wayne Community College? No? Darn.
Sometimes we do.
Right. So, but not tonight. How many of you are UNC Chapel Hill alums? Wow, cool. That's nice. How many of you listen to country music that you'd say your sort of favorite artists are pre-1980s? Patsy Cline, all those folks. Who listens to the contemporary stuff? A mix. Wonderful. So we're going to explore some different music tonight and some big ideas. And some of it, hopefully, will be music that maybe you've heard somewhere that you can connect those listening experiences to. So we're going to start with the question of what is country music. It is a very hotly debated topic. In fact, if we were to substitute what is bluegrass music anyway, people get in fisticuff fights over that kind of an argument. We're not going to do that tonight. But here are a few ways that scholars might answer this question. They would say it's a genre. And a genre is something that is a constantly renegotiated category that has lots of different actors or agents providing input into how that categorization works. And so your audience has a say in that. Your music makers have a say in that, and the business infrastructure around country music has a say in that as well. So there are certain musical styles, instruments, ways of playing, ways of mixing that our ears say, yeah, that's country. There are certain ways the music is marketed, what it is next to, how it is, and this is going to be important tonight, how it is tagged in online databases. Sometimes that tagging occurs from the consumer's end. Sometimes it is tagged by genre from the artist's end. It's defined by audience perception. When I send my students out to write concert reviews, the question that they're supposed to start with is, do most of the people in this room tonight think they're here for a country concert? And there are cases where an individual artist will or will not meet that starting point criteria. And it's defined by lineage and pedigree. So when you stood up here and said Patsy Cline, you're establishing a certain kind of lineage. So if I'm an artist about to play you a song, which I'm sadly not going to tonight, the people that I name check, the songs that I quote, the people that I make allusion to, all of those help define my genre every bit as much as the sound of the music that I myself make. So we have a lot of different ways that country gets defined. But in general, most people, most of the time, would agree that we have these sort of central points of reference. And if I say Hank Williams and I show you a picture of a guy in a nudie suit with a WSM microphone, we're establishing a shared reference point, a center point in our categorization. Now, that starts to raise interesting questions when we say, what's out there right now that is country? So I always pull up the Billboard charts when I'm talking about this music to see what's at the top of the charts right now. The guy up here is the guy with the #1 hit right now. It's Luke Combs. Acoustic guitar, black button-down jeans, standing outside of the brick building behind him. I found it slightly humorous that the guy who had a lot of #1 charts exactly a year ago, Blake Shelton, acoustic guitar, outside, greenery, bricks and stones, black button-down and jeans. So there's a look to it. There's a sound to it. This is Beautiful Crazy, which is the #1 country hit right now.
Day starts with a coffee and ends with a wine. Takes forever to get ready, so she's never on time for anything. When she gets back, come get me. I'm looking
That's a sample. You've heard that stuff on the radio somewhere. And if we check what the top 50 songs by the commercial trade measurements are, in other words, the Billboard charts, here's pretty much who is making country music right now. Out of the top 50 songs, there are 75 artists this week that are represented, if you count the duos and the artist number 1 featuring artist number 2 and the bands. So 75 people have their name in the marquee of those songs. And I was curious about their demographics. 62 of them are men, 13 of them are women. That's actually a good week for the women right now. Only 8 of the songs are headlined by a woman. Again, it's actually a good week right now. It could be a lot worse. There's only one person who identifies as a person of color on that list. Pretty typical. The image and the song titles and the song lyrics and the way that they're produced represent a working class identity. And the songs are unsurprisingly about love, lost love, and having fun. But that's not always been the case. Even 5 years ago, that list would have been very different. So one might say, country is what's on the Billboard charts right now. This gender topic is going to keep coming back tonight. And so in the last few years, this has been suddenly in the press, even though the ratio you saw is not new. A couple of years ago, there was a consultant in the music industry who gave a public talk about explaining why there were so few female artists played on the radio. And his choice of analogies was, the radio music is a salad, and most of it is, your lettuce and whatnot. And then you just sprinkle on a few tomatoes, and the female artists are the tomatoes. You can't have too many of them. So Tomatogate was born. But this question of gender is going to be part of what we're looking at tonight. Now, there are those of you out here, I hope, who are saying, just a minute, the Billboard charts and top 40 country radio do not represent all of country music. You have a local artist you like. You know there's a scene in Texas that is treated differently. Some of you actually drift towards Americana in this group, I'm willing to bet. And you know there are alternative and indie artists who are working with country tropes and themes that aren't represented in that Billboard collection. So there's a whole other side of country music that actually functions by setting itself up in opposition to Nashville and the mainstream industry. And what we're going to look at tonight are some situations where artists in this alternative Americana space bump up against the commercial country world. Sometimes they're brought in and accepted. Often there's a lot of friction and a lot of colorful press. So let's do the same thing quickly for bluegrass. There are a lot of bluegrass fans in here. What is bluegrass anyway? What's an instrument that would signify bluegrass genre? Banjo, right? So we've got our 5 instruments. If you've got a banjo and a fiddle and a guitar and a mandolin and a bass player, especially if they're not electric bass, we're going to start out assuming some kind of bluegrass connection. So we have some really strong signifiers there. We have names and references. There's Flatt and Scruggs. We like to talk about them because Earl Scruggs is from North Carolina. And the definition most scholars start with is bluegrass is music that sounds in some way like the music created by Bill Monroe. So now we're using a point of reference, not unlike our Hank Williams example. It's defined by marketing and venue. If you get invited to play the festivals, well, now you have some kind of bluegrass identity, regardless of what you sound like. It's defined by audience perception. Which journalists are writing about you? If Ted Lehman came to your concert and wrote a blog about it, then in some way you're bluegrass. There are these people who help to be gatekeepers in this. And clearly by lineage and pedigree. We have your artistic identity, how you dress on stage, who you talk about, what songs you cover, and how you play your banjo. Those details are how this complicated social category of genre works. So, how popular is country music? The answer is both very popular and more popular than non-country fans want to believe. The data for this started to come out to the public in the early 1990s. In 1990, the music industry changed the way that it collected information on what was being played on the radios. They switched to electronic monitoring. Most of my students have an app on their phones called Shazam. Does anybody in here have Shazam on their phone? You click on it, it gathers the sound, electronic imprint of the music that it can hear, and it tells you what the recording track is. So This started in 1990 for the electronic airwaves for radio broadcast. And we found out what people were actually playing on radio stations. And then we got electronic point of sale monitoring of sales data. So rather than calling up the hipster guy who runs the record store and saying, hey, what did you sell this week? Every time he scanned at checkout, it got electronically recorded, and the data started collecting sales from Walmart, which radically changed the profile of what was being sold and how much of it. And the entire music industry said, oh my goodness, country music is popular. This was like a news flash. And since then, we've been watching this continual sort of reawakening and facepalming of, oh my goodness, people like country music. Really? Yeah, they do. So it is often the #2 radio format over the past 10 years. It kind of bounces right up there with your pop contemporary. Talk radio kind of filters in there too. It is usually the 3rd favorite genre of a full demographic survey, but if you narrow the age, if you cut off teenagers and up to about 23, it's #2. And if you cut off all the 20s, it's often #1 for favorite formats, for people who are passionate enough to say they have a favorite format. And it sells, these were album sales, but includes with digital sales at this point, it sells as the #2 format. Hip hop doesn't actually sell product, it's all in the streaming ephemeral world in terms of volume of consumption. And bluegrass is a niche market. Bluegrass doesn't matter economically to the music industry, but it matters passionately to the fans. So we don't measure sales, because if you sell 1,000 copies of your new bluegrass album, that's phenomenal. But we look at festival attendance. It's a different kind of fan experience, and Raleigh was touting 223,000 people at this year's IBMA. How many of you were among that 223,000? Some. Merle Fest pulls about 78,000 people now as its audience base. So this music matters even when it doesn't get a lot of attention. 42% of the US population listen to country. Their average household income is well above most averages. 71% of them own a home. The audience is 54% female, even though your radio format country, which is most of what those people are listening to, is about 10% female. It's 88% white. And that number is kind of low depending on how that exact measurement is done. And the Country Music Association advertises a much higher number, but less biased organizations put the number around 24%. So it's close to the national average. And what I want to talk about tonight, now that we have this portrait of a fairly popular music that really captures a broad swath of your regular demographics of Middle America, is what a writer and musician named Patterson Hood tagged as the duality of the Southern thing. Because everything about country music and bluegrass music is in some ways linked to this regional identity, from its origins to the way that it is perceived both by insiders and outsiders. So he was part of a band called the Drive-By Truckers. They worked in kind of the alt country scene, moved a little bit more into the rock world. And he's a very eloquent writer, and he says, in my song on this Drive-By Truckers album, I discussed the dualities of being from a region that is known for great music and literature and art and something called Southern hospitality, but is also known for Jim Crow laws, slavery, racism, and the Ku Klux Klan. I talked about being fiercely proud of the good parts of my heritage and mortified and ashamed of the bad parts, the ones that too often define how other people perceive us. The narrator of the piece, and when listeners hear the piece, they really hear this as coming from his voice, not a character in the song, claimed to have lived most of his life down south, running away from the things he was ashamed of, only to move up north and at some point to miss the other parts of his upbringing. Such is the duality of the Southern thing. So we have this musical genre that most of us at some point listen to or are regularly exposed to. And it's really a genre based on intrinsic tensions. It's Southern, and it's cast as rural, even though over and over and over again we hear songs that talk about wanting to leave the small town, or lack of opportunity, or the economic abyss in which people find themselves who are living what should be the rural ideal. It's very conflicted there. It's Southern, even though it's no longer regionally grounded in the South, and honestly hasn't been since the 1920s. It's white, but that's a very strange thing to ascribe some kind of racial association to sound. Sound waves are air pressures. And yet this music carries this deep encoding of racial association. The music is cast as masculine, even though its audience is predominantly female. It's just the way it is. And even in the songs, regardless of whether we have a male or female singer, even in the song's texts, the storylines cast the hero as the male figure, almost all the time. And it's working class in its musical construction and its lyrics and its narratives and its tropes, even though its audience really isn't, statistically speaking. And so there's this continuous tension between wanting to do something that is traditional and grounded in that rural, Southern, working class identity, and something that is able to connect to its modern audience. And that struggle has defined so much of the music's evolution. It's pop, meaning a lot of people listen to it, which means it's popular, has crossover access, and yet it is distinctly not. Because if it was pop, then it wouldn't be country, and genres require differentiation in order to exist. And it's both mainstream, we know a lot of people listen to it, and marginal, in that we keep pretending people don't listen to it. And the we includes the music executives. So we're really talking about the tension between assimilation and differentiation in how the music works. So I wanted to start with a clip from a documentary called How to Grow a Band, which followed a mandolin player named Chris Thile. He's from California. He first appeared on the musical scene as part of a band called Nickel Creek around 2000. He's a virtuosic performer, amazing technical proficiency. And he started out as this like blonde California kid who could play really well, and he became this dominant figure in bluegrass. And then he moved beyond it and started doing really creative artistic projects that were not part of the tradition of the sound of bluegrass. And he put together a band, kind of a super group band with amazing players called the Punch Brothers. And they went on tour in 2008, and they're in Glasgow, Scotland here, about to play a very famous old venue in this space. And he sees the marquee out front of his concert, and they're in the green room, and he calls his manager.
It says tonight Bluegrass, Punch Brothers, and then on the on their program it says Hot Bluegrass Show. If they feel the absolute need to say bluegrass, then I have to say progressive or contemporary bluegrass. Yes, not hot bluegrass. Like, what does that make you think of? Hot swing. Like just exactly. Ron Vincent of the Ridge. Mountain Heart. Yes, you would. Exactly. Okay. And now think of a band who plays the same instrument that couldn't be less like any of those bands that you just mentioned. Who comes to mind? Yeah. Good. Excellent. Can the promoter be called right now? It's. I don't like Jay Bluegrass either, but I'm just saying anything that would give them a hint. Because right now, seriously, it's the Hot Bluegrass Show tonight. Okay? And we're going to play a 40-minute string quintet. Awesome.
And we're going to play a 40-minute string quintet on banjo and mandolin and guitar and fiddle. So this is a person who, if Chris Thile was playing IBMA down the road in Raleigh, it would be standing room only, and everybody would get in their car and go see this legend of bluegrass. And he's on the phone telling his manager to call the promoter right now for tonight's concert because you cannot call this bluegrass. I mean, if you have to call it something, I'll live with chamber grass, is what he says. Chamber grass. Isn't that great? This is the kind of tension that we find with genres and audience expectations. So here's one of my absolute favorite bands. A lot of Tar Heels in this band. This is Steep Canyon Rangers. It's a band that formed on UNC's campus when a number of them were undergraduates playing on Airport Road, which is now, of course, Martin Luther King Boulevard, for those of you who've hung out in Chapel Hill. And then after graduation, the band kind of solidified its membership, moved to Asheville, practiced, played the festivals, and started to get a lot of attention. They started to win a number of prizes. Steve Martin, comedian, actor, and musician, hired them to be his touring band. And he and Edie Brickell took Steep Canyon Rangers on tour, at which point they became, I'll say, a household name for anybody in the bluegrass world. And they won a number of Grammys and a ton of attention at them. And the person I want to talk about tonight is Nicky Sanders. He's their fiddle player. He's a fiddle player who trained at the Berklee School of Music up in Boston in all kinds of styles that didn't include bluegrass. But he heard that Steep Canyon Rangers were hiring a fiddle player. They needed a new fiddle player. And he got in his old car, as he tells the story, and drove to Asheville to audition. And he gets there, and he can play, but he doesn't know the style. And he starts to get advice from people. And they tell him things like, you've got to learn how to do a Georgia shuffle. That's a bowing technique. You got to learn how to do a triple shuffle. And when Nicky tells the story, he says, so I did, but I've never used it since. And he gets hired as a member of the Steep Canyon Rangers, this headline bluegrass band, nationally known, recognized, successful band. And their talk is, we are bluegrass through and through. They are respected that way. They are invited to the festivals that way. And I would like us to probe tonight a recording that they play as one of their trick showstopper numbers at every concert. Who's seen Steep Canyon Rangers live? Anybody? A couple of you. So you've heard this song before. This is called Auden's Train. Okay, this is bluegrass band working with bluegrass identity, bluegrass audiences. Auden refers to W.H. Auden, and the text of this song is Auden's poem Calypso. So we're in a literary space. You would have read this in a 20th century lit class. So this random video from this, you saw the title of the song up there, said Orange Blossom Special. It's not, but that's the most famous train song in bluegrass history, where you used your fiddle to imitate the train whistles and the sound of the chugging along of the train. So they've already mislabeled it, but they've mislabeled it in a way that actually makes it more traditionally bluegrass. So let's see what happens next. That's that bowing technique he swore he was never going to use. That's that bowing technique right there that he swore he was never going to use. And I clicked, so we have to start it over. I apologize for that. We're going to fast forward a little bit and hear how this song unfolds. Classical music fans in here who just said, Grieg, I heard classical music. But you don't just have to be a classical music fan to have the wait, I'm an insider enjoying the joke experience. Bill's fans can also have that experience. There's a little Norwegian wood. Let's do just a couple more. The entire song is everything you can play in the key of E on a violin or fiddle. Find this one. That was the band's War. And one last. Every time I do that, it jumps. All right, here is the last one. Khachaturian, Russian symphonic music. So you got some or all of the jokes. And we're playing with this genre that is rooted in tradition, simplicity, mountain music, the way that it got picked up by the folk revival in the 1960s and marketed was the antithesis of high art elitism and modernization. And the fans eat this up, the duality of it, the tension of it. You're there hearing bluegrass. We know it's bluegrass. Nicky Sanders talks the talk of bluegrass. He left behind his Berklee School of Music training to join the band. And then we laugh every time we catch these intertextual references that he puts in there. So there's the poem. It's not Orange Blossom special lyrics. It's W.H. Auden. Anybody heard Fox on the Run as a bluegrass fan? You cannot avoid it if you go to a festival and you walk through the campgrounds and the jam circles are all around you and they're all playing Fox on the Run. You cannot join a jam circle if you don't know Fox on the Run. It's bluegrass standard. And it becomes this when Bill Emerson brings this song that he likes to a band called the Country Gentlemen, who were based out of Washington, D.C. in the late 60s into the early 70s, one of the longest running of the bluegrass bands. And they record it, and they put it on their album in 1971. And the Country Gentlemen have said, here is a bluegrass hit. And everybody eats it up and learns it. And this is the song that bluegrass fans all know.
She walks through the corn, leading down to the river. Her hair shone like gold in the hot morning sun.
Does anybody know where Bill Emerson got it? Man for Man, British rock, 1968 recording. So we'll let you hear that. This is the sound coming over as if a little bit late on the British invasion. Listen to the accents. You can tell where they're from.
She walked through the corn, leading down to the river. Her hair shone like gold in the hot morning sun. She took all the love that a boy could give her, and left me and I like the boss on the run.
It's a cover. That's not surprising. Musical genres are full of them. Songs migrate just like people migrate, foodways migrate, everything else migrates. But the way that the bluegrass fan communities invest in the ideas of authenticity and of origin, even in the face of those who know where these songs come from and the mixing and the mingling, and even in the face of those who enjoy the Khachaturian and the Grieg, and there's Rossini in the Steep Canyon Rangers version as well, play into this narrative. So this is actually one of the things that keeps bluegrass going, these ways that we suspend our disbelief about the genre. All right, let's do one that is so in the press right now, like news flashes. If you've got your Facebook feed, it's all people are talking about. There's a song called Old Town Road. It's by an artist from Atlanta, southern Georgia. Some of the first country music recordings were made in Georgia and sold in Georgia when Fiddlin' John Carson was down there on WSB, old radio. And the song is about wide open spaces and horses and country stuff. And the artist is Lil Nas X. And when he submitted the song to the various electronic databases from which most people get their music, including iTunes, he said, I think it's country. So he tagged it as country. And the song got picked up by an app that was having kind of a trendy contest to come up with cowboy memes. It had nothing to do with country music. But where you could create your own video, you at home on your laptop could just kind of come up with some images and videos to go with the song on there and submit them for this contest. And it got picked up for that, which boosted its streaming count. And in the country genre, it doesn't take particularly high numbers to get noticed. So Old Town Road shows up on the Billboard country charts with 0 country radio airplays. Country stations are not playing this. People who listen to country music are not streaming, downloading, or buying this. And here it is on the country charts. So some people in the press get wind of this, and they start to ask questions about it. Have any of you been following this in the last 2 weeks? So the Billboard executives say, this was a mistake. We have determined that this song does not have the sonic identity of country music. We are pulling it from the country chart. So they're policing their charts. At which point the press and the morning talk radio shows got really excited because they said, this is racist. You've taken an African-American artist and taken them off the charts and denied them the ability to identify their song as country. You want to hear it?
Horses in the back, horse like it's attached, and it's matted black, got the bushes like a man. Riding on a horse, you can whip your horse. I've been in the valley, you been up on that porch. Can't nobody tell me nothing. Can't nobody tell me nothing. Riding on the track, lean all in my way, cheated on my buddy, you can go in.
And the fans who are listening to this have it in the hip hop genre. And the rhythmic groove you're hearing there would typically be described as trap, which has a whole 20-year history in hip hop. But then Lil Nas says, I called it country, it's got a banjo, it's country trap. Why can't I be on the country charts? So then the radio DJs go to town discussing this. The video that ends up being associated with the song is constructed from video game footage. It's a first-person shooter Old West game, like Wild West game, you're cowboys in a shoot 'em up set. So these are not actors, this is video rendering characters in a video game that becomes the constructed footage for the video for this song. So the discussion and the reason journalists have been calling all week is, are there black people on the country charts? Well, yes. Was this racist? Partially. Who gets to decide what sounds country enough? And they say, well, a lot of the stuff on the country charts is full of hip-hop references and is full of these crossover references. So how does genre work when country is borrowing from mainstream and when the mainstream, which includes hip-hop at this point, has financial incentives to tag their music as country? So we're going to look at a couple more cases that expand this set of ideas. This is Rodney Atkins. He's got a song on the country charts right now, and he's based out of Nashville. And for this recording, he found himself doing a local gig with the Fisk Jubilee Singers, which is a vocal ensemble started in 1890 at Fisk University to raise money that is, without question, the most famous musical ensemble representing the history of spirituals. And he enjoyed meeting them and liked their stomp, clap, a cappella body rhythm sound. And he said, I want to bring them onto my record. So with no controversy whatsoever, we also have this artist, Rodney Atkins, an established country artist, with a song on the charts in the top 20 that includes the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Didn't raise an eyebrow. The few people who've written about it have gone, wow, that's cool. They're all in Nashville. They all perform at the Ryman Auditorium. This is great. And you can hear the stylistic connections in that. That's their body rhythm. So the genre has said, that's fine. It's not just fine, it's good. But no Old Town Road, that's hip hop. They're not the only ones. This is Sturgill Simpson. He's a country singer who has never gotten any purchase in Nashville. He won the Grammy for the best country album in 2017, and he cannot get a radio cut to save his life. He's considered this kind of alt indie space as a country performer. Well, he got really pointed in his criticisms of the Academy of Country Music and the Country Music Association in 2017, and basically said, all this contemporary country on the radio is not real country. Merle Haggard would hate it. How can you use his name? The stuff that's out there is pop crossover trash. Shame on you. I am the keeper of tradition and real country music, which might lead you to wonder what he sounds like. So in 2017, he had released his third album. It got a lot of critical acclaim. It was on a larger label. He had a larger budget for it. And he had gotten to do the musical things he wanted to do for this album. And because it was nominated for and ultimately won the Grammy Award, he gets to perform on the Grammys. So this is Sturgill Simpson on the Grammys in 2017, performing his song from the album A Sailor's Guide to Earth, and he's backed by an interesting band.
Sun won't shine when it seems like over his ears. Don't be afraid. Life's sometimes you can let go of the pain if you choose. Time slips away.
The New York-based Dap Kings, a really well-known soul band. It's been recording for years. So that's the sound of the artist who is lambasting the Academy of Country Music and the Country Music Association for not being traditionally country enough. So the Country Music Association does the same thing that the Billboard charts did to Lil Nas X and his Old Town Road song. They said, you can't come. And they banned him from the Country Music Association Awards show in 2017. So in true alternative country style, Simpson took his guitar case outside the arena in Nashville where the awards show was being filmed, turned on his phone, streamed himself live on Facebook, busking on the streets with his Grammy in the guitar case for Best Country Album. Fans loved it. Got quite a viewing audience for that. So what we're playing with tonight is these differences between the sonic profile of the music. I mean, you just heard something that in a blind listening test, I hope most people would say, those are some soul horns up there. The rhetoric that these artists use to present themselves and tie themselves to their past, whether it's Sturgill Simpson celebrating Merle Haggard, or the way that the Steep Canyon Rangers connect themselves to Bluegrass, or the way that fans themselves connect to the songs and invest in these ideas of genre. And when these few occasions pop up into the press, when there's some kind of genuine conflict, like the Billboard executive having to go on record saying, we have removed a song from the charts, they bring all these things into a much bolder public focus about how it is that we identify our genres and that we connect to our music and that we see ourselves relating to it, whatever our backgrounds are. And there's a really basic theory that talks about how either my musical tastes are in the water I drank as a baby, it is who I am deep down, or it's a public mask I put on, a performance of identity, and I could change over my life. I could change how I see myself and how I see myself relating to my communities. And all of this comes out every time somebody like Lil Nas X says, no, that's country trap. Prove to me it's not.